We were prompted to organise this forum after realising that there was a significant degree of confusion in the climate movement about the 2009 amendments to the Electricity Industry Act, which created 2 new offences for protest activity at coal-fired power stations and imposed considerably harsher penalties for such activities. We felt that this confusion was having a stifling effect on the movement, and therefore hope that this forum will provide clarification on what the laws do and what they mean to alleviate this confusion.
So as Julia said, we wanted to hold this forum to provide a space for community education about these laws, but also to discuss the issues that they raise in terms of the implications for public participation in and political expression, and what they mean for democracy and civil liberties. What do they mean for our society's ability to really take action on climate change? So we'd like to also welcome and thank our 3 speakers who you'll be hearing from tonight. And that is Felicity Milner from the Environment Defenders Office, Brian Walters SC, and Ellen Roberts. Speakers tonight will be providing you with a briefing on the law and be analysing the implications for civil liberties and for climate activism. Each of the speakers will speak for 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. And I'll pass on to Julia now to provide some context.
First, I'd like to, before we go into our speakers, I'd like to sketch out a brief history of these laws and also make a few comments about the political and economic context of these laws. Firstly, scientific consensus is now clear that we must drastically and immediately cut emissions from fossil fuels, particularly oil and coal, if we are to avoid the most serious effects of dangerous climate change. Despite concerted pressure from climate action groups, NGOs and the public, we have seen no serious policy to take the necessary steps to address climate change at a governmental level. We can trace the cause of this inaction partly to our reliance on emission-intensive forms of energy production. In Victoria, this refers to our addiction to cheap, plentiful brown coal, the most greenhouse-intensive fossil fuel in the world. In recent years, many citizens, frustrated with persistent government reluctance to genuinely address climate change and instead provide active support to greenhouse-polluting fossil fuel industry, have taken to voicing their dissent by engaging in various forms of protest. Tens of thousands have participated in walk against warming rallies, and hundreds have engaged in direct action by blockading railways and ports used to export coal, and by interfering with the operation of coal mines and coal-fired power stations. In September 2007, the first direct action targeting a coal-fired power station, in protest at the failure of the APEC Regional Forum in Sydney to take the issue of climate change seriously, 4 activists locked onto a conveyor belt at the Loy Yang power station, rendering one of its generators inoperative for several hours. From that time, direct action targeting coal power production, has increased. Throughout 2008 and 2009, a series of protests and actions organised by different actors were held at the Hazelwood coal-fired power station in Gippsland. These range from targeted instances of direct action by small groups, such as locking onto the coal conveyor belt and a coal dredger, to mass community actions, such as the Switch Off Hazelwood, Switch On Renewables protest in September 2009, in which over 500 people participated. A further background context, which led to the introduction of these offences, it's important to look at the privatisation of the electricity industry in Victoria. The sector was completely privatised during the Kennett era. Various sectors of the industry, from electricity generators to electricity transmission and distribution, were apportioned and sold to private operators. One of the interesting features of this process was that the purchasers of the generating facilities were multinational operators. Powergen International and International Power, which are based in the United Kingdom, acquired Geelong and Hazelwood respectively, and CMS Energy and NRG Energy, based in the United States, bought Loy Yang A.
Okay, so you have a privatised electricity sector. You've got a government that isn't prepared to take real action on climate change, and you have community members that are getting increasingly frustrated and voicing their dissent or their frustration through protest activity. So with that in mind, we'll just briefly go through the political circumstances that preceded the passage of the bill. So As Julia mentioned, in 2007 we had the brief shutting down of Loy Yang power station, Loy Yang B, I believe. And then following that, in December 2008, the Ministerial Council on Energy, so that's a council comprising all the energy ministers from the state and Commonwealth levels, met, and they issued a request to the Attorneys General in all the states, and they requested that they review as a matter of urgency the penalty regimes that apply to unlawful protest-related disruption of critical electricity infrastructure. Very wordy, but they were the words that were used in the communique. At the time, the Queensland Mines and Energy Minister, Jeff Wilson, said the request indicated how seriously the ministers considered recent protest activity in various parts of Australia to be. So the Attorneys General, the Council of Attorneys General, reviewed the offences throughout 2009, and then it submitted its report to the Energy Ministers at the end of the year. It advised that the Commonwealth will assess whether any new offences specifically targeting the disruption of essential services provided by critical electricity infrastructure should be developed. That's the part of the report that's publicly available. The rest of the report, I've tried to get through Freedom of Information requests, that hasn't worked, but it gives you some idea of what's going on or what went on before these laws were introduced into the Victorian Parliament in October last year. So they were introduced in October and then passed in November.